and it had a low poly aesthetic. At the time, a creative decision because we didn't have good enough technology to do really high poly stuff. So yeah, Interstate 76 is my absolute favorite game of all time. And unfortunately, many people have not played it. It is available on GOG if you want to go try it and download it. And it's a DOS game. So it's been a long time. But yeah, that's instantly my favorite game of all time.
That's awesome. Dom, what's your favorite game?
I have two, actually, so I can't even pick one. The first is Halo Combat Evolved. And the reason I picked that specifically is because that game was what put me into game design. I knew what game design was and level design from playing Halo Combat Evolved. And I remember the sound design on that game being a nightmare for me. Like, it did things to my soul that I still haven't recovered from till date. So I loved that. And then what I would consider my favorite modern game to be would be Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, I don't think I need to explain why. It's Red Dead Redemption 2. It is an absolute monster of a game and deserves every accolade it's gotten to date. So that's it for me.
That's cool. Anna, what's your favorite game?
I think it's hard to pick one. I think in terms of the older games and it's the nostalgia play, any of the early Mario games, because that was kind of my entry point. I used to go around to my friend's house who had this N64. We used to play together. I just feel very, very sentimental around those games. And then I think more recently, actually, the Zelda games, like Breath of the Wild, I love those games. They're just amazing.
That's cool.
So Nintendo girl through and through.
Yeah, I love those games. I personally am a F1 fan, so I love
nice
on the Xbox. Yeah, cool. All right. So moving on a little bit more about talking about careers in gaming. Curious to understand from each of you, what skills are you looking for in people when you hire them?
I can talk a bit about this. I think sometimes it's dependent on the level of which you're hiring. I think for as much as I look for skills, which could be around more data analysis and project management, I also look for aptitude and attitude as being equally as important. And someone's sort of approach of getting their hands dirty, getting involved, wanting to go the extra mile, which is harder necessarily, it can be harder to quantify, but I think is equally important. Ultimately, I'd rather hire someone who doesn't necessarily have all the sort of tick by tick skills on a piece of paper, but demonstrates the ability to want to grow and learn into the role.
That makes a lot of sense. When I think back in careers, you're usually looking for those hard skills, but also those soft skills. Do they have the right behaviors, the right attitudes? That's a great point. Dan, curious to hear, what kind of skills do you look for?
Well, because I come more from the content side, originally it was being able to hit a schedule. As a writer myself and as somebody who worked as a freelance writer for many years, hitting that deadline is what gets you the next gig, right? If you're constantly late or if your copy is not clean. So I'm looking for core competency in the skill that I'm hiring and a realization that, when I give you a date, it's a real date. Since I've jumped the fence, and I have to say what an unbelievable education it was from covering the industry as the press and thinking I knew what was going on to actually being on the front lines and getting my hands dirty. The number one skill that I look for is somebody who is a problem solver. Mm-hmm. All of game development, my experience in game development for the last several years has been, there's a new problem. You didn't think you were going to face it. You can't predict it, but do you have the skills to try to figure out what the situation is and work towards a positive solution? Being able to think on your feet, not melting down when something goes wrong, or not just blaming everybody else, just saying, well, here's what I think is going on. Here's what I can do. Working with the team to say, all right, this is the reality we're in. this is how I think we can get to the next phase. That is the single most important thing, just problem solving skills.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I feel like that is so true. No matter whether you're in the gaming industry or anywhere else, people are looking for those problem solvers. How do you manage a crisis? How do you like put things together? So that's very well said, Dan. Dom, what is your perspective?
I think I'm very well aligned with Dan and in the situation. So earlier on, because most of the roles I used to hire for when I started were towards community, one very paramount thing for me was somebody who cared, right? I needed people who genuinely cared either about the game they were going to work on or the community that played that game. I wanted someone who, and this might sound bad to say, but someone who would have difficulty just going to sleep at night if something was horribly, horribly wrong with the way the community felt about something we did, because
Right.
then you're with somebody who wants to solve that problem. Now, since transitioning from just community to growth and to more publishing now, I look for executors, right? I have a common phrase in all my hiring chats, which is executors have a track record. It's always going to be there. It's either going to be on that piece of paper or you're going to find it after a 30-second, conversation, 30 minutes conversation with the person you're potentially thinking of hiring. But you would see a track record of getting things done one way or the other. And once I sort of can't find that, then it becomes a bit of an issue for me, or I begin to raise an eyebrow on whether someone should join a team that I'm leading.
That makes sense. So what I heard, like three things. One is, do you have the right behaviors, right? Do you have great attitude? Are you a problem solver? Can you execute, right? And I think these are like universal skills and traits that we look for when we are like hiring people. Now, specifically when you think about the gaming industry, what kind of skills do you feel are like kind of, especially as like aspiring professionals in the gaming industry, what skills do you think would give them a competitive edge, especially from a global perspective?
I think from where I sit, which is more on the commercial and business side, like those kind of core commercial skills, whether that's down to being able to forecast or think strategically about like what's going on within the industry and say how you might be able to find opportunities as a business within that. Those would be some more of the specific skills that I'd be looking at within gaming. So, what are competitors doing? What platforms are they publishing on? Like, what kind of trends are we seeing? Like, where do there seem to be opportunities, like in territories that we haven't necessarily thought of? And I think someone who can, they don't need to be versed in everything that's like going on within the industry, but can look at those trends and think about them and begin to identify opportunities. It is really, really valuable.
That's great. Dom?
Yeah, I just want to double on what Anna said here because I do have an example of this. I was at Gamescom last year, and this came into play as well, where you talk to all these people across maybe BD or sales or whatever, or growth, and for some of them, when you discuss, you can tell, they know what they're saying, they understand these things on paper, but for others, they understand the industry, not just the terms, right? They know what everyone is up to. They understand why something would work for a certain market with reference to previous products that have existed in that market before. And I saw that live, and I saw how every single time I spoke to someone who really understood the industry, right, and what was happening, I understood them as well. So when you take this back as well to looking for people who you would want to join your team, you want to have people as well who, to a very, very good degree, understand the industry. It sets them apart from anyone else who might understand the pure technical or commercial skill sets that are needed to execute. That additional knowledge with the industry sort of sets these people one degree further.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dan?
It's funny, mine comes almost entirely from sort of being at a small studio with a creative role. The skill that I wish I had and the skill that I value in coworkers is understanding what is possible with coding. Like when I was a game reviewer, I was stunned that like if you are a film reviewer, chances are you've at least tried to make a film in your backyard on your phone or on a camcorder or on a Super 8 camera, depends on how old you are. If you're a music reviewer, which I was for several years, you have tried to play music yourself. You know what the act of creation is. For video games, all you have to do to be a video game reviewer, it turns out, was play a lot of video games. There was nothing for the creation of it. So what I tried to do was get a more I like wrote a text adventure because that was what was available to me, or I modded some Quake 2 skins because that gave me a chance to dig in. And the further I got, the more I realized that if I knew more about how to code, I would know what was possible. Having an empathy for my engineers and knowing that creatively, I want you to do this, but if I could have mocked it up a little bit or said, I would approach it this way, is that the right way to do it? To have a better language with the people that are more technical on my team. As a pure creative, I don't currently have that. I've had, you know, we have good conversations because I'm friends with them and we can communicate openly. But many years ago, I was on a panel with David Vonderhaar from Treyarch, the Call of Duty Black Ops developing teams, and he was the multiplayer designer. And I asked him, you know, how do people get your attention if they have a game or they have a game idea and they want to show you, or you know, they want to pitch you this great idea for a game? He says, don't tell me your idea, let me play it. Like he expected that you would have enough basic skills to be able to create your own prototype to hand over to him. And I realize that's a skill I don't have. But if somebody comes in and says, I'm primarily an artist, but you know, I know some C++, that is a huge like bonus to me. Being able to have not an expertise in every field, but an awareness and an understanding of what your coworkers are going to need to do when you start working with them, to me, that's huge.
That's a great point. So what I'm hearing is like, you know, I think you also look across the board, we're looking for people who understand competitive insights, who understand industry, who can look at what new markets are emerging or new categories are emerging. And then I think then like what you described is what sometimes we in the industry call like a T-shaped, right? You may have a lot of depth in one area, but you have awareness of how your peers are working, whether it's an engineer, a creator, an editor, but just like having that empathy builds you a more well-rounded skill set that you can have a core competency in one area, but you have a broad awareness, just helps you develop better, right? Whether it's in the gaming industry or anywhere else. These are like universal skills that help you kind of get into the industry, but also succeed as you grow in your career. So very, very, very relevant points from each of you. Moving on to like the next set of questions, you know, we talked about industry trends. So I'm actually curious to hear from each of you. What do you believe are the biggest trends shaping the industry? And what are you currently solving from those industry trends?
I can tell you mine, which I think is like quite a challenging one actually. But I keep on returning to last year there were nearly 20,000 games released on Steam, but the majority of player time is on games that are over 4 years old. So I think the question over discoverability, how people spend their time, what cuts through, like the levels of competition now, because it's not just within games, right? It's within TikTok, Netflix, like attention, basically, and the growth of IP, you know, and like your fandom, like you're a fan of something, like you're maybe the game is a core, and then it's how it like permeates into all other parts of your life. And that is I think that is a like a big trend that I see in gaming, which is both really challenging, but also, you know, there's a lot of opportunity and interesting things going on with it as well. I think the opening up of like different regions through different platforms. I think growth of gaming in places like LATAM, like Africa, is really, really interesting. Like how are you able to reach players who you haven't necessarily been able to reach before? There's a lot of opportunity there. So that's just a couple that I think that interest me.
That's great to hear. Dan, what do you think are some of the biggest trends in the industry right now?
Anna stole my answer. Yeah, I totally agree with the discoverability. A friend of mine recently reached out to me and said, "I'm starting my own studio. What do I need to do?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, I've never started my own studio, so I have no no real good advice." But part of it was that how do people find what you're working on? Anna makes a good point that it's not just gaming you're competing with anymore. It's anything that comes over your mobile device. It's anything that comes over any device, because it used to be you bought a dedicated console and you bought a cartridge, and it was more of a solitary experience. Now there's so much interplay between the games and social media, and you're using the same device to talk to your friends that you are to play with your friends. I don't really know how you get your game discovered without a massive marketing budget. It could be a great idea. Balatro was something that was brought up to me. They're like, well, Balatro did it. I'm like, Balatro is like winning the lottery. It was absolutely my game of the year last year. It was my favorite game that I played, but it was a labor of love from a very small team, and it took 3 years. And that journey of 3 years is what people didn't see. They just saw, oh, this game is awesome, and all my friends are playing it. It's a huge success. It's just that simple. How did Balatro get discovered? Mostly word of mouth. Can you engineer word of mouth? Not really. You have to be able to put in the work to go to indie conferences or Penny Arcade Expo in America, where there's an indie booth, or GDC, where there's an indie corral, So I honestly, I think that is one of the biggest issues. And I hate to be the first person to use these two letters, but AI and how that enters your workflow as a pure creative, I'm terrified, right? Like I have people out there that are like, well, maybe we don't need so many writers because, maybe we'll just use AI to do a story outline. And I don't want to hear that, obviously. I read online somewhere, the phrase that stuck with me is that AI should do mundane things for creative people, not creative things for mundane people. And so I feel like figuring out where does AI fit in the workflow, because as a coder, my friends that are coders are like, it's really good for helping me fact check my work. Computers know what computers want to see, right? So I understand AI's value in that context, but how does it apply to all the other contexts? Where will we draw the lines? Will we draw lines? Will you simply have to use AI as a tool the way that is this just the spell checker coming back to me and going, well, you had no problem with me when I was an automatic spell checker, So that's my big question is how does AI fit into the modern workflow at all levels of the industry? But also from a struggling developer point of view, how do you get your game discovered with so much noise out there, even with developing markets that are hungry for, there are people that want to play your product. How do you reach them?
That's great. Thank you, Dan. Dom, curious to hear your perspective on industry trends.
Yeah, I think Dan and Anna have really covered a lot of it. And I'm sure when we even go over and talk about maybe other things like problems being solved, we'll talk more of this. But I also want to just shed a bit of a positive light on the positive trend, because I know a lot of it isn't easy when you look at how things are going in the industry. One that I have noticed, but I'm also happy about, is just the desire from the markets on the kind of games they want to play. What I mean by this is, for the last 10 years more, great games were defined almost solely by great fidelity, like high fidelity and great graphics. So a lot of the top games were the games that looked good, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the thing, games should look good. But when look good is defined by the degree to which it looks real, then that isn't all there is to looking good. Like, looking real isn't all there is to looking good. And for, I think, the last 10, maybe even more, 15, 20 years, there was just this consistent upward trend on the better looking games being the more realistic looking games, right? And those games being considered the better games. But I do think for some reason we've reached some peak points where everyone has now realized, you know what, we don't need all our games to look like actual human beings, right? We just want to play great games and have great experiences. And now we're having this trend where artists are being put back in the forefront and are being let the free range to be creative with the kind of content they want to put out there for how games should look. And you have some of these games going all the way to, you know, like when, whether it's game of the year or just be notified or recognized within the industry. And I really love that. I think we are unlocking artists again, and we are letting them be artists rather than just one-dimensional creators who simply make what looks as close to a human being as possible. So that trend makes me super happy and also gives a chance for a lot of indie studios to shine. And I'm excited to see that happen.
That's awesome, Dom. So I think we heard a couple of things here, right? One is industry trends are shaping, and like, how do we think about discoverability and new markets? There's a variety of platforms, everything from mobile apps to TikTok videos to consoles. So how do you make sure that you're being discoverable in each of those right forums? I think, Dan, you make a very good point about the usage of AI. And is AI going to like disrupt everything in games? Can game developers leverage AI? Can creators leverage AI? I think that brings up a lot of good questions. Personally here at Udemy, for example, we are definitely leaning into like, how do we help people learn AI, and how do we leverage AI to actually make learning more effective? We're doing a lot of things like AI-driven role-play simulation or AI-driven like wipe coding. And we believe that AI, if used correctly, is a force of good. But I think it has to have the right guardrails and the right things. So I think you bring up a lot of great points. And then Dom, loved your point about like, bringing the humanness back in games. It's just not about the best quality or the most realistic, but letting creators shine again, letting indie developers shine again. Those are definitely trends that I can see. And I think the virality of it, people hear about it from each other, and that's what builds the game of the year. Those are some great insights. So maybe like a slight, kind of pivot from where we are. Like, I'm just actually curious, as each of you are experts in areas, what is like the top one or two problems that you are currently solving? Would love to hear your perspective on that.
Mine is age old. My number one problem is not having enough hours in the day. I'm happy to say that I work in at a smaller studio. Digital Eclipse is owned by Atari. We got acquired last year, and it's been a very, very good supportive partnership. So I'm happy about that. But we're also a very ambitious small studio. So right now, what I see is I talk to our business development team, and they're like, great, we've got like 4 projects lined up, but maybe we only have the staff to do 2. So now we're trying to figure out, do we outsource this? Do we work with a contractor? Can we add headcount? Just being able to do all the work as we get a better reputation for the kind of projects that we do, which are leaning more away from collections of older games and into interactive documentaries that apply to those collections of those games. So it's, for instance, my current project is working on Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, which is not just all the old Mortal Kombat games, but an interactive documentary that explains this is the making of, and we have interviews with the original developers and concept art and development documents and things like that. So that it's very time intensive. And as that projects like that, along with side projects of original games, happen all at once, I'm having trouble figuring out how to get all the resources that I need to get those projects done and not go crazy. I'm a big fan, after years of not respecting the work-life balance, I'm a big fan of trying to respect my work-life balance now. So, this is not an original thing to say, I just don't have enough time to do everything I want to do. But working at an ambitious company, it becomes an actual, like a survival process for me. So yeah, don't bite off more than you can chew is kind of my current mantra. And when other people are doing the biting, I have to just figure out how to slot into that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, no matter which industry or where you are in your career. That's great to hear. Anna, what is some of the biggest problems you're solving?
I mean, I would say it's kind of similar, actually. The I think I think also something that I struggle with a lot is that I guess how do you slot in to a content roadmap in terms of BD opportunities and getting stuff done? Because content is generally going to take precedence. Again, to go back to Dan's point, there's only a certain amount of hours a day, a certain level of resource. Like, how do you find your place in that, shall we say? And I think on one of the games that I work on, one of the big challenges that we have is that, like, you're talking about a game that is like 25 years old in terms of its code base, and that brings out a whole heap of issues when, I talk to partners and they're like, oh, it's an SDK, it'll take a couple of days to integrate, etc., etc. And I'm like, no, give us 6 months, maybe 9. Like, it's that. So that is an ongoing challenge, which is not going to go away, but we do what we can.
Yeah, makes sense. Dom, curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for me, and the one I've dedicated the last 4 years now, almost 4 years now, to solving is, the growth of games in emerging markets specifically. So that is my thing. And it's a two-way problem, if you will. It's the growth of global games, if you will, in these new frontier markets. Because when you compare, for example, Africa to the rest of the world in global gaming, like Africa is growing like 6x the
Yeah.
pace compared to the rest of the world. So this is the frontier that everyone should be involved with. And there are so many more stats to look at. Maybe it's the average African being like, I think, 19 or 20 years old compared to someone maybe in other continents that's much, much higher, decades higher even. So it's how do we get these global games and how do we work with these global games and showcase the opportunities that exist in markets like, the Middle East and Africa. And that's what I spend most of my time doing now. Funny enough, the reason why I'm taking this call from a hotel room is because we've just finished up an Africa regional qualifiers for a global game where the African champions are now going to the global world finals for the first time ever. That has never happened. So that's my life right now. But then there's a second part, which is a lot more relevant to this call. And it's how do we take emerging talent and content from emerging talents globally as well. So not just globally in here, but from this region going globally as well. And it's something I noticed every single time I've tried to hire talent or I've tried to work with talent. There's a difference in saturation between when you're trying to work on certain projects in, let's say, North America or Europe or anywhere else versus in some of these emerging markets. It's much, much easier to find people to work with there on these things than here. So it's how do we empower more people and give them access to the things that would empower them and give them the ability to also be able to produce globally relevant work and content, which is why the career accelerator for me is super, super important, because then people have the ability to learn and then can grow across board. So for me, it's that handshake. It's two ways. It's global content to emerging markets, but also emerging talent and talent and content from emerging markets going global and becoming relevant globally as well. So
Yeah,
that's my thing.
Thank you, Don. That's a great segue actually to a question that I'd like to share from the audience from Ferenc. How would you start to look for a game dev or a 3D animator job if you just left university and have no real life experience? Maybe Dan, do you want to answer that question first, and then we'll go to Anna?
Yeah, honestly, because a friend of a friend came to me and said, I'm an artist and I need to get noticed. And my advice to them was similar to what David Vonderhaard said to me. Don't tell me that you want a job. Show me what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a writer, I found that that was more important. When I started out, and this is 1992, 1993, print media was a thing, and I was working for like my school paper. And what I learned and what my elders told me was being regionally published is more important than just writing for yourself. So it may not feel like a lot that I was writing and getting in like a local arts paper, but I proved through by doing that I had the skill that it took to go through the process of being edited, that I was humble enough to have somebody say, this is how you can improve your copy. I had proven that I had hit the deadline in order for that to appear in print. So I would say as a new artist, what I told this person, first of all, put a lot of your work up on LinkedIn, constantly post, like once every week. Here's something I'm working on, whether it's something from a commercial project or an indie project, or just something you've been monkeying with. Show people what you can do actively. But if you can join small indie teams, if you can say, I helped contribute art to this game that is available on Steam. Okay, maybe 25 people played that Steam game, but you proved that you could do it and that you can work as a team. So, honestly, I understand what it's like to be like, I have nothing but great ideas and I believe I have the skills, but I don't have a portfolio to show. Start building that portfolio as much as you can, even if it's stuff that you're making with your friends, even if it's stuff that you're making with another small team, because it proves that you understand what the process is for making games. And I think that's what makes you hireable, because somebody wants you to join their process.
Yeah, so demonstrate real life skills, like what have you actually done? That's a great point. Anna, curious to hear your perspective.
I don't know how much more I can add and add to Dan's point. I think that point of like showing, not telling, and doing what you can. I mean, I think there's the other stuff, which is like get out, meet people, like network, go to meetups. Like jobs come about, or experience like can come about in the most random ways. And actually, like that's how I ended up in games. Like I knew these guys because from film days. I was living in Paris at the time. I literally called them up and I was like, can I come and meet you? And went and met them and was like, I've got to do this. I'm going to do an internship. Can I come and do an internship with you? And that's how it came about. And look at where I am today, and I still see the guy. I saw him like a couple of weeks ago at Gamescom who gave me that job. So, it's these, I think that point of like networking, socializing, meeting people, like really can have an impact. It might not always be immediate, but it can lead to stuff down the line, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And Dom, I know you have an interesting story to share of how you got into game dev. Maybe it's relevant for the audience to hear as well.
100%. I mean, I could talk about how I got into games, and one important thing for people to bear in mind is, so even though I started doing a lot of things on the gaming side when I was in university, those were my own projects because I was trying to break in, so creating a company and all of that. But that went downwards, and I had to go back to using my degree, which was in geography and environmental management, or which isn't, by the way. So it has nothing to do with the work I'm doing now. So I was working on like United Nations environmental projects, doing remediation projects in South Nigeria. Now, what helped me make that transition was game jams. And this is very well aligned to what Dan said when Dan talked about like, don't tell me, show me, right? When you want to show people you can do stuff, sometimes you then have the question of, okay, but I'm an artist. I can't build an entire game. All I can do is make art. And I don't have a team. I don't know anyone around me. Well, game jams are a super, super way to help here, right? If you find the game jam is this thing where maybe over a weekend or a week or 2 weeks, you can be paired with a bunch of strangers who also registered for this game jam. And then you guys are tasked to make a game as small as possible, but just as playable as possible. And then you get to actually publish that and release that. In 2020, right, when I was looking to transition from running my own gaming startup to now like working in games as a designer, I was doing game jams every single weekend. It was back-to-back game jams. And that meant by the end of just like 2 months, I already had about 4+ games with my name on it as a designer, right? Are these games super small? Yes. But are they playable games? Yes, once again. So now I could take those and put those on my portfolio and say, I've built these games. If whether they came from game jams or they came from a AAA $100 million budget, it's still a game and it's still there. So I'm sure maybe I can share a link to a couple of calendars. There's one I use or used to use that has basically game jams that happen every other week, and you can just register for as many. But it is a solid way to build that portfolio and then use that portfolio to eventually go out there and look for jobs. But also bear in mind, some of the people you would meet during those jams could either be looking to hire somebody or even like know somebody who's looking to hire and could make a referral for you. So it is the perfect place to be honest.
I love the stories, right? Like, game jams, and then what you mentioned about like, how people need to show their work. I know your point about like networking and just get an internship. I feel like these are all great advice for somebody who's just looking to break, right? It's not just about like spending time in a room learning to code, but also like putting all these things to place. Maybe go get a capstone project done, build out those portfolios, go join a game jam, show up, right? I think those are critical things. Maybe like follow-up question, Dom, I'll come to you. There was another question from the audience. You know how we think about studios use different engines? Kind of curious to get your take. Do you think it's better for aspiring developers to master one engine and specialize, or build a more generalist foundation, even if that means maybe not being as strong in a single engine?
Oof, this
Tough
is
one, huh?
this is incredibly tough. I mean, I do think you want to learn and know as much as you can about the engine you use. Dan raises the point of always the handshake, right, being a competitive thing where you at least know, understand what others do and you're able to relate with them. But I also think like proficiency is super, super important because usually some studios and some companies tend to like go down one route and they might have multiple projects, and they, for sake of like, clean code or things of that sort, they would try to use that one engine consistently for their different projects as they go ahead. So chances are, if you're going towards one route of game development, or you're looking at certain companies, you will probably keep working with that one engine. But it doesn't mean you should stay there. But I think when you're starting out, especially because you need to prove yourself, it's important that you need to show that you're really, really good at what you do. And then when you prove that and you have your foot in the door, you can also have some time and hopefully now some money to also like expand your proficiency towards other engines in case an opportunity comes knocking that needs you to make a sidestep. That's my perspective, and I'm happy if any of the other panelists think of it in a different way.
No, I think that's fair. At Digital Eclipse, we are actively hiring an emulation engineer. So we're looking for somebody with very specific skills. But we also just recently hired 3 more engineers that are more generalists. It's funny, Mortal Kombat is top of mind, but I remember there was a time when Mortal Kombat was doing its own thing. It's totally fine. They had their tools, they had their expertise, and then their parent company signed a giant Unreal license. And they were told, this is your new engine. Anybody knows anything about Unreal, this was built for 3D environments, not 2D fighting games. So everybody on that team had to learn how to use Unreal and heavily modified it to their own use. So in a case like that, having an Unreal specialist is fantastic because they can help you do something that the engine was never really designed to do. At the same time, even within Digital Eclipse, we did a Wizardry remake that was in Unreal. While none of our other projects are currently built in Unreal. So sometimes somebody is going to be looking for that specialist. It's like, I need somebody who knows Unity inside and out. I need somebody who knows Unreal inside and out. I think it's great to hang your shingle on that, to sort of be like, if you need an Unreal expert, that's me. But absolutely, to Dom's point, you can't just know that one thing. You have to at least be familiar with some of these other things and be willing to start learning what you don't know about the thing. So I think either realm is valid. I think you can be an absolute specialist, with incredible accuracy of, you can count on me to solve the problems that are esoteric to this development system. but I also think that there's value to, but I can kind of pick anything up if you give me a little bit of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Right.
I think, as I look back, I'm not a game developer, but as I look back at my career in like software development, I think you're right. Like you can go follow both, but like usually you start out by like learning one engine or one software and like you specialize in that. And then as you evolve, you start to pick up something else and you start to become a generalist. So there's no right or wrong answer. It all depends on like what makes sense and which situation you're in. And a little bit of a shameless plug. I think, if you look at the career accelerator for gaming at Udemy, you can actually learn, Unity, and then you can like use a Blender and learn 3D modeling. So there's a good place. It has a lot of courses on Unreal. So to your point about Unreal, like, I think people can pick up a lot of those courses, like build up that specialized knowledge. There's like some different, like I saw there were like 11 hands-on practices. So again, use that to build those practices, showcase some projects. That can be a good stepping stone for people to like learn different types of engines. But this is a great conversation. I'll kind of move on from this area. So we talked about industry trends. We talked about like how do you get what kind of engines should you like focus on, but a little bit more like focusing towards the role of data. And maybe Anna, I'll ask you this question. You mentioned about like kind of getting your hands dirty with data earlier on and like kind of really getting into it. What role does data play now for digital marketers? And what skills would you consider essential for this?
Well, I'm not necessarily focused on the digital marketing side of things. It's more about the evaluation of like business opportunities. And I would say that data provides, it's kind of critical towards building business cases for whether you essentially do something or don't do something, and trying to analyze what opportunities look like. I think the challenge that you will have, and it's like I can tell you something funny, is that relatively recently we have someone interim working in finance who turned around to me and said, I don't think I like forecasting in games. It's pretty much impossible. I think the point about like you forecast how you think a game is going to perform or what the opportunity is. You do your best to kind of build out what those different low, mid, high scenarios look like. You look at what titles you want to benchmark against, but ultimately, like things are, it's a creative endeavor, and therefore pinning numbers, it's making money on spreadsheets, and I think then you also can run into issues like there are regions in the world where it's very, very hard to get data for, like China being one. Yes. And so I think the point that I always have about data is like it's critical, like it underpins how you make decisions, and it allows you to make informed decisions, and it allows you to then go back and learn from it. But no one can predict the future. So you can't ever look at it as like I forecast this, therefore we're going to do this. But it just doesn't happen. It's not the case.
Yes, we have this joke around spreadsheet math, right? Like, you can predict any kind of business case on a spreadsheet, but real life tends to take on a very different twist and turn. So.
Making money on spreadsheets, yep.
I was a convert to data. When I joined Ubisoft, I was very much, from a content perspective, Dom, like you, I've done a lot of work in communities. So I was in charge of social media channels. I was in charge of building communities or maintaining communities that had sprung up that had been underserved. And the thing that surprised me working at Ubisoft was everything needed to be backed by data. And I just didn't understand that, because I came from a purely, I'm going to write whatever I want to write, and I'm going to use the force, right? And this is so funny. Literally the second or third day at my job at Ubisoft, I got on a plane from San Francisco to Paris, and we had a conference for all of the community developers. And our very first meeting was Yves, like the CEO, Yves Guillemot. And he just said, I love what you guys are doing. I really believe that we should be speaking to our community directly, but I can't support you without data. You need to bring me data to justify what you want to do. Because I believe in your mission, but I can't just say as the CEO, let them do whatever they want. Everybody needs data to prove this. And I said, well, there's no ROI in being a nice guy. Like, I didn't say that to him, but that's kind of what I came away with, was that community is such a soft skill. And yet this can help the long tail of your product. And this can help people evangelize for you and say, have you played this new game? You know, if they feel valued as a community member. So I had to learn the value of data and the value of being able to point to, look, when we did this campaign with the community, when we talked about this aspect, we got this much engagement, or we got this many people sharing. So I found the data points. So to Anna's point, absolutely, like, data is critical. Data became something that I begrudgingly accepted and then slowly learned was sort of like a secret weapon for somebody in creative, because you think it's all about ideas. It's not about ideas. It's about proving that your ideas are worth other people investing in.
Yes, such great advice. And I think that's true for people in this audience to think about, how do you leverage data to do strategic storytelling, right? It doesn't matter if you're a creator or marketer or finance person. You gather that data and then figure out how to leverage it to make a compelling argument or a story, and then let it go where it goes. So it's a great point. Okay, we've had an amazing time. We've been speaking for about 50 minutes or so. So I'll do the last question as a wrap up, given we're kind of running out of time. But maybe as the last question, I would ask, what is the one skill that you are working on right now, or maybe what is the latest thing that you've learned? Curious to hear your take on that.
I mean, AI, and how not to use it just as a search engine is probably my honest answer. Because I think this realization of how do you utilize what's there in your day-to-day in a productive way, but in the right way. It's something I'm trying to wrap my head around. I have my own feelings around it, but I think it's really important. So yeah, top of mind for me. Yeah. You got to learn it. Exactly. Yeah. That's it.
Dom?
Mine is publishing. So it's one big phrase, right? And an interesting one. But the reason it's happened is because, over the years, I started out with community, moved into design, came back into community again, moved into growth. And one thing partners have consistently seen is because of, the passion I tend to bring to caring about this particular ecosystem when it comes to emerging markets and the work we've already done to grow things there. There is now this world where I'm serving as this bridge, trying to make that handshake happen again. And a lot of it is publishing work, where you're working with a lot of these super huge global titles, but from a context of this emerging market and actually growing there. And it is difficult, to say the least, because you have all these plays and playbooks and ways that would work everywhere else, but just doesn't work in these markets. So learning how to marry the nuances of the market I operate with to the modes of operations for some of these global titles is my job and is my current point of difficulty within managing publishing portfolios. So what would I typically look at when I'm learning things like this? It's a lot of business learning. So I found myself taking 2 to 3 MBA in a box courses on Udemy in the last couple of months, just to be able to sit and have these conversations consistently with global game leaders, as well as more marketing refresh courses again and again. But it's overall just consistently getting better at being, a publishing leader for games in emerging markets.
That's great, Tom. Dan?
For me, it's process, refining my personal process, but making that process transparent to my teammates so that I can show them this is what I'm doing, but this is how I'm doing it. They don't always need to know how I'm doing it. Sometimes they just want it done. But there have been many times in the last year and a half between the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game and the Mortal Kombat collection where I've really just needed to say, this is how I'm doing what I'm doing, and be able to share the logic of my process. It is an ongoing thing. There's always a more efficient, I'm always looking for a different, a new way to make it more efficient or make it more clear to my coworkers. That's been one of my issues in the past where stuff makes sense to me in my head, but I haven't necessarily articulated why. And that has created friction. So I've been learning, like, know why you're doing what you're doing. Even if you're just guessing, we all do make it up as we go along, but document what you're making up as you go along and be willing to improve it next time you're facing that situation. Be self-critical a lot and say, this is how I should have done that better, or I should have asked for help at this point, things like that. So a personal process that can be shared with other people, even if they don't apply it, they can appreciate it, and it helps the communication of the team.
Perfect. Such great advice from each of you as real world practitioners. Learn AI, go into design and like publishing, think about MBA in a box, think about process. These are all some great skills that, and also shows that you're continuously learning, right? Because learning never stops. So this is great. I feel like, thank you so much. You know, we've spent an hour and like time goes away fast when the conversation is fast paced and so much fun. I hope the audience learned a ton today. And I think in summary, I would say that the gaming industry is booming. It offers opportunities far beyond game development, whether it's design and publishing or marketing, growth and partnerships. There are a wide range of careers to explore within gaming. And I think each of you shared some unique insights that I really believe will help the audience as they think about their own career paths within gaming, right? And of course, they can always come to Udemy, learn some new courses, learn some new skills. We're here to help, whether you want to learn AI or leverage AI to build your next game, right? We're all here to help the audience. So all I want to say in summary is thank you so much to each of the panelists, Dan, Tom, and Anna. It was a pleasure having you all today. And to the audience, good luck with your gaming careers. Goodbye, everyone.